In the post-Civil War decades, the United States moved from the country to the city. Urban development was attractive and exciting for many who migrated from farms and small towns, as many new opportunities became available in the city life. But with this exciting new adventure came severe social problems such as overcrowding and slums. After the 1880s, the new immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe flooded the cities, usually welcomed with hostility and discrimination. With the new immigrants came different faiths and beliefs, so religion had to adjust to social, cultural, and intellectual changes. American education expanded rapidly, especially at the secondary and collegiate levels. Women's opportunities for education increased in both separate institutions and co-education. Conflicts over the topic of moral values, such as sexuality and the role of women, appeared. Addressing these issues was American literature and art. The new city life provided women with many opportunities but put strain on the American family as families grew more isolated from society. The average family size decreased and the divorce rate rose drastically. Amusements and sports became popular but also more standardized, keeping with the new urban nation. By 1900, the U.S. population nearly doubled from the 40 million people enumerated in the 1870 census. In the same period, the population of American cities tripled. The lure of many industrial jobs pushed many Americans off the land and into the cities in both Europe and the U.S. The Last Breastwork. This political cartoon shows a line of American city dwellers and industry workers. In the back of the painting, one can see a fort, which represents the McKinley Tariff of 1890. Coming to the American line are people carrying a British flag. The American linemen are seen wearing collars which represent the jobs that they acquire. The message is that most Americans benefited from the tariff of 1890 due to the profit it brought them. However, there was a small amount of Americans that did not benefit from this, and they tried to find a way to benefit from it by coming to the city. This cartoon was presented during the election of 1892. It was made to side with the Republicans and present that their thinking of industry was what America needed to succeed. Also, it expressed that the Democrats were misguided and pushed for Americans to vote for the Republican nominee. This cartoon articulated how the Democratic tariff reformers, otherwise known as free traders, would undermine the American economy and make it fall. In the end, the Republicans won control of the presidency. They then passed the tariff, which allowed America to progress in industry and become a better country. In 1860, no city in the U.S. could boast 1 million inhabitants. However, by 1890, New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia all housed well over 1 million. By 1900, New York was home to 3.5 million people, the second largest city in the world next to London, England. Construction of skyscrapers allowed more people and workplaces to be packed onto a piece of land. The Chicago architect Louis Sullivan claimed that form follows function, and made skyscrapers usable by the perfecting of the electric elevator. Commuters traveled to and from work daily by transit electric trolleys. The megalopolis carried the cities into different districts for business, industry, and residential neighborhoods, which were segregated by race, ethnicity, and social class. Electricity, indoor plumbing, and telephones made the city more appealing to the rural people. Also, department stores such as Macy's and Marshall Field's attracted the attention of many middle-class shoppers. Household products sold in bulk at local stores now came in throwaway bottles, boxes, bags, and cans, which eventually led to the issue of waste disposal. City life did have its negative aspects. Criminals flourished in the heavily populated areas. Impure water, uncollected garbage, unwashed bodies, and droppings from draft animals enveloped cities in an overwhelming stench. Also, many low-class citizens found their homes in the slums, which were overcrowded barrack-like structures with horribly poor living conditions. By the 1880s, more than 5 million immigrants cascaded into the country. Before the 1880s, most of the immigrants were from Western Europe and were Protestants, Irish Catholics, or Catholic Germans with the high rates of literacy. In the 1880s, however, the new immigrants, mainly Italians, Croats, Slovaks, Greeks, and Poles, who came from Southern and Eastern Europe, were mostly illiterate and impoverished. They tended to be Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, or Jewish. Rapid population growth, American food imports, and European industrialization brought about an army of the unemployed in Europe, so the army came to America to seek new opportunities. In fact, 60 million Europeans fled the continent in the 19th and early 20th century, and about half of them moved to the United States. The land of the free appealed to many newcomers, as they were freed from military conscription and industrialized religious persecution. Savage persecution of minorities in Europe was not uncommon. Most notable was the persecution of the Jewish minority population in Russia. With the new immigrants came their diverse traditional cultures. Catholics expanded their parochial school system in many areas. Likewise, the Jewish people established Hebrew schools. Foreign language newspapers abounded, and many immigrants established restaurants and food stores with products of their homelands available. The newcomers did not have an easy assimilation into American ways. There was nearly no government aid given besides the minimal checking to weed out criminals and the insane. Likewise, city and state governments proved inadequate to the task. Some aid came from the political side, unofficial governments led by bosses. Those who were running for a political position offered jobs and services to the immigrants in return for their support in the polls. In addition, women saw an opportunity to aid the impoverished and took hold of it. Jane Addams, a middle-class citizen and one of the first generation of college-educated women, established the Hull House in Chicago. It was one of the most prominent settlement houses that aided newcomers in the process of assimilating into the American lifestyle. It offered instruction in English, counseling for those coping with the new big city lifestyle, childcare services for working mothers, and cultural activities for the neighborhood. Many other women followed Addams's lead, proving to be just one of the new opportunities for city women. Many nativists viewed the new immigrants as a corruption to society. With their high birth rates and low standards of living, there was fear that the newcomers would outbreed and outvote the original Anglo-Saxon stock. With their willingness to work for starvation wages and the dangerous doctrines they carried with them, such as socialism, communism, and anarchism, the new immigrants became the face to blame for the degradation of the urban government. Nativists also argued that the foreigners were difficult to unionize because of the language barrier. Ready for business. The political cartoon shows an Irish Catholic immigrant being auctioned off for his vote in an election. This can be seen as the immigrant has a piece of paper with the word vote written on it. Also, behind the immigrant, there are two signs, one for the Democrats and the other for the Republicans. The immigrant is leaning towards the Republican side, giving the feeling that the Republicans will benefit more from this. The cartoon gives the message that the Republicans were striving to obtain the incoming immigrants' votes. If the Republicans were successful, they would win the presidency. This political cartoon is from the presidential election of 1884 between the Republican nominee, James Blaine, and the Democratic nominee, Grover Cleveland. The Republicans hoped to receive votes for many Irish Catholic immigrants venturing into the country during this time. The person who ran this auction was John Kelly. John Kelly was a political enemy to Grover Cleveland, and the Democratic Party was worried that they would lose the election because of this. However, this fear was soon subsided due to the nomination of Thomas Hendricks for the seat of vice president. This smoothed things over with John Kelly, and it soon led to the narrow victory of Grover Cleveland and the Democratic Party. With this, anti-foreigner organizations arose. One of the most prominent was the American Protective Association of 1887, also known as the APA. It urged the voting against all Roman Catholic candidates for office and sponsored the publication of lustful fantasies about runaway nuns. In addition to this anti-foreigner organizations, Congress also enforced a number of restrictive laws on the newcomers. In 1882, paupers, criminals, and convicts had to be returned at the expense of the careless shipper who brought them to America. Also in 1882, in some areas, the Chinese population was barred completely from the states. In 1885, Congress prohibited the importation of foreign workers under a set contract, usually for substandard wages. In 1917, a required literary test favored the old immigrants over the new immigrants. Overall, the various religions of the immigrants gained strength in the move to America, particularly the Roman Catholic and the Jewish faiths. By 1900, the Catholic Church became the largest single denomination, with 9 million members. A man devoted to American unity, Cardinal James Gibbons of Baltimore, was responsible for much success in gaining new members as he was popular among both Catholics and Protestants. Liberal Protestants adapted religious ideas to the modern culture and called for modest reforms and came to dominate American Protestantism. The Church of Christ Scientists, founded by Mary Baker Eddy in 1879, also gained popularity. In her 1875 book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, she revealed that the true practice of Christianity heals sickness. On the other hand, modern trends in thinking came to interfere with many religious beliefs. Charles Darwin, an English naturalist, offended many in his On the Origin of Species book. In it, he explained that higher forms of life evolved from lower forms through a process of random biological mutation and adaptation, or natural selection. To the fundamentalists, those who believed in a strict interpretation of the Bible, his teaching was seen as contradictory to the dogma of special creation. Many people came to accept his idea over time, however. After the Civil War, public education continued its upward climb. Tax-supported elementary schools gathered strength, and by 1900, there were 6,000 high schools in the country, which provided free textbooks. Teacher training school, called normal schools, experienced much expansion also. In 1860, there were 12 normal schools, but by 1910, there were over 300. In addition, new immigration brought strength to private Catholic parochial schools. In 1870, the illiteracy rate of the entire U.S. population was 20%. In 1900, it fell to about 10.7%. The impact normal schools had on the public in 1896. The schoolhouse is the nation's fortress. The men and women who are teaching in the state are doing more for the Commonwealth than any other agency in it. By the mid to late 1800s, education continued to become an important part of society. A trend that came about especially after the Civil War were schools called normal schools, which were teacher training schools. In the Columbian newspaper on February 6, 1896, an article was published on normal schools in the public. The author of this article was an advocate for the normal school system. He believed that normal schools provided a more thorough way of teaching and broadened the system of studying. The author expressed how normal schools allowed for public schools to offer classes such as history, physiology, drawing, and music into the public school system. It is clear that the author of this article believed that normal schools were vital instruments in education. He understood their needs and expressed that in his document, one important necessity that normal schools lacked was financial aid. He wanted to keep up the school's improvements and buildings, but they needed the support of the state for this. The author firmly believed that normal school graduates deserved respect from those who did not graduate from a normal school. These teachers were properly prepared and responsible for educating the next generation. He believed normal schools were a necessity to broadening the school system. Nowadays, our society does not offer normal schools to prepare those who wish to teach. Instead, colleges offer specialized classes in order to prepare them for the career of teaching. As normal schools were necessary in that time period, they became unnecessary when colleges offered more opportunities for practical courses. Although the normal school legacy that the author thought would live on has died, it expanded the idea of preparing a person to enlighten the youth of the age. In 1990, 44% of non-whites were illiterate. Dissatisfied with that number, Booker T. Washington was the head of the Black Normal and Industrial School at Tuskegee, Alabama. There he taught useful trades in order to gain self-respect and economic security for the Black population. Also, teacher and researcher George Washington Carver was an agricultural chemist who greatly helped the economy of the South in discovering new uses for peanuts, sweet potatoes, and soybeans. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who happened to be the first Black person to earn a Ph.D. at Harvard, also contributed in founding the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He believed that the Black community should be given full and immediate access to the mainstream of American life. Further advancing the education of American citizens, colleges and universities blossomed, most notably in the Midwest region. Even women's colleges gained substantial ground. By 1900, 1/3 of all college graduates were women. Government support of colleges and universities was vital. The Morrill Act of 1862 provided generous grants of public lands to the states for the support of higher public education. The Hatch Act of 1887 extended the Morrill Act by providing federal funds for the establishment of agricultural experiment stations. Also very vital were the many new industrial millionaires who donated immense fortunes to educational enterprises. Among them included Cornell University, 1865, the University of Chicago, 1892, which was a result of John D. Rockefeller's oil millions, Leland Stanford Junior University, 1892, and Johns Hopkins University, 1876. There were many pressures that came along with the effort to advance education. The Darwinian challenge made religion and science seem less compatible and caused the university educators to divorce facts from values. Industrialization and science brought demands for practical courses, and therefore specialization became a primary goal of a university education. William James, one of America's most brilliant intellectuals, taught on many different fields. In his Principles of Psychology, 1890, he established the modern discipline of psychology. In his Will to Believe and Varieties of Religious Experience, he explored philosophy of religion. Finally, in his Pragmatism, he described America's greatest contribution to the history of philosophy. The press also became a major source for information to many. Public libraries made substantial progress in many areas throughout the country. The Library of Congress, 1897, was built to have 13 acres of floor space. Andrew Carnegie contributed $60 million for the construction of public libraries. With the invention of the linotype, newspaper presses spurred. In addition, sensationalism captured the taste of the public. Stories of sex, scandal, and other human interest stories became sources of enjoyment for many people. Journalistic tycoons like Joseph Pulitzer used techniques of sensationalism in his New York World. William Randolph Hearst also used similar techniques in his newspaper, the San Francisco Examiner. Many Americans, through their writing, expressed their desire for the reform of society. Edwin L. Godkin's The Nation was a liberal, influential journal with entries from professors, preachers, and publicists. It crusaded for the civil service reform, a call for honesty in government, and a moderate tariff. One journalist, who was said to be poor in formal schooling, but rich in idealism and kindness, was Henry George. His Progress and Poverty stated that property owners unjustifiably profited from the pressure of growing population on a fixed supply of land. He argued that a single 100% tax on those profits would eliminate unfair inequalities and stimulate economic growth. Also noteworthy, Edward Bellamy, who was a quiet reformer from Massachusetts, published his novel Looking Backward. It was a socialist novel where he looks backward and finds that the social and economic injustices of 1887 have diminished under a peaceful government that has nationalized big business to serve the public interest. Other literary works came from the category of post-war writing. General Lewis Wallace, a veteran of the Civil War, sought to crush the wave of Darwinian skepticism with his novel Ben-Hur, A Tale of Christ. This work was seen as the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the anti-Darwinists. Poet Walt Whitman was inspired by the Lincoln assassination, which influenced the writing of two of the most moving poems in American literature, O Captain, My Captain, and When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. Many other Americans proved themselves in creating other literary landmarks. The feminist Kate Chopin wrote about adultery, suicide, and women's ambitions, which were highly controversial topics in that time, in The Awakening, 1899. In addition, the famous Mark Twain wrote numerous entertaining classic tales, which recaptured frontier realism and the authentic American dialect. Some of his most famous were The Adventure of Tom Sawyer, 1876, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1884. Theodore Dreiser, a homely writer from Indiana, was a great social novelist. In his Sister Carrie, 1900, he portrays the fictional character Carrie and her disregards for prevailing moral standards of the time, which came to offend many people. Revealed by many literary works, there seemed to be a new kind of morality standard that emerged in the years of the city life. Victoria Woodhull, a divorcee, sometimes stockbroker, and feminist propagandist, declared her belief in free love in 1871. Her and her sister then published the periodical Woodhull and Claflin's Weekly, which charged the popular preacher Henry Ward Beecher for having an adulterous affair. Also, Anthony Comstock declared a lifelong war on the immoral, a self-appointed defender of sexual purity. He confiscated over 200,000 obscene pictures and photos, and over 4,000 boxes of pills and powders used by abortionists from many people. Women's growing economic freedom encouraged sexual freedom, and the new morality began to be reflected in soaring divorce rates, the practice of birth control, and the frank discussion of sexual topics in general. The urban environment caused many women to grow more and more independent. More than 1 million women joined the workforce in the 1890s. The feminist prophet Charlotte Gilman published Women and Economics and called on women to abandon their dependent status and to contribute to the larger life of the community through productive involvement in the economy. In 1890, militant suffragists formed the National American Women's Suffrage Association, founded by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. In 1900, the most effective women's suffrage battle leader was Carrie Chapman Catt. Unlike other women, she didn't argue that women deserved to vote as a matter of right, but stressed the desirability of giving women the vote if they were to continue to release their traditional duties as homemakers and mothers in the public world of the city. And despite the cries of male critics, many women became permitted to vote in local elections. The urban life, although having a positive impact for women, had a negative effect on the family. There were drastic changes in work habits as men and even the women and children worked. usually in scattered locations. Also, birth rates were continuously dropping as there were not enough space to house more children, and techniques of birth control became more commonly used.